The Astra Militarum of the Imperium of Man is the bulwark against the terror that tries to destroy all of mankind. Indeed, the poor souls of the Imperial Guard are sent forth in their droves unto death and slaughter, callously thrown away time after time again, perpetually in a state of unending war. For theirs is not to question why, theirs is only but to do and die. Such is the pitiful fate of most men and women who serve the Guard, forever thrown away by an empire who does not care about them, pitifully trained, pointlessly sacrificed, and completely and utterly incompetent. A perfect example of the grim darkness of the far future. At least, that is how it seems to you and I. Oftentimes, the Imperial Guard is derided as being one of, if not the weakest factions in all of Warhammer 40k. At least on an individual basis. Their victory is attributed to luck or sheer overwhelming numbers, for you will run out of bullets before they run out of bodies. And many believe that this is on purpose, that the Guard is purposefully trained poorly and not capable of fighting the foe. But what if I told you that that is not the reason why 90% of all Guard die in their first engagement? What if I told you that there is one reason above all, that make the Guard utterly incompetent at times, and even more damningly, when that reason is absent, the Guard become monsters that can box the stars and duel the heavens. But what is this reason, and why is it that all the old bastards of the Guard seem to have left it far behind in the dirt? That, ladies and gentlemen, is what we're going to cover in today's video, as we're going to find out just why old Guardsmen are so bloody effective. So strap on in, buckle up, and let's get crackin' on with today's video. Firstly, let us answer, why are they so ineffective? As with anything, when it comes to talking about generalization and Warhammer 40k, the Guard specifically, take this with at least a tablespoon worth of salt. For those of you who are new to 40k, or just need a little refresher, the Imperial Guard is a main standing army of the Imperium of Man. In truth, there is no standard pattern. There is not one universal Guard regiment. Instead, each planet will create a so-called Brigade of Guard, and there they will draw regiments from there. For example, Cadia. Cadia has multiple regiments, but each regiment falls under the total umbrella of the Cadian Brigade. This has many pros and cons. Pros is that the Imperium can just order regiments raised planet by planet. They don't have to do any massive oversight, and they can quickly raise forces to get rid of hotspots. It also means that worlds can effectively garrison themselves at times. The downside is that it is completely and utterly a coin toss as to what you'll get. There's a chance that you'll get some amazing regiments, a la Vastroyan Forceborn, Cadian Shock Troopers, Death Corps of Krieg, or the Catachan Jungle Fighters. But on the flip side, you may get regiments that are basically just criminals armed with knives and shotguns. That's why whenever we see the Guard in any form of media, it really is a coin toss. Sometimes you'll see the Guard being the badasses of 40k that they were meant to be, proudly flying the flag of humanity high and bright. Other times, you see them scurrying away, slowly being devoured and torn apart, wondering why the hell they were even there. And it's this coin toss that many people attribute to why the Guard is so shit at times. The fact that a Guard regiment that performs poorly simply was just trained poorly. It was equipped poorly. And whilst this initially is not exactly a bad justification, it's not exactly a true justification, at least in most cases. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we're coming to the reason why the Imperial Guard often performs so ineffectively. And that's because the Guard doesn't know anything. The Imperium is not a nice place. Information in the Imperium is heavily monitored, heavily restricted, and heavily kept under lock and key. If the Imperium doesn't want you knowing something, they will make sure you are unable to find it out. Throughout the ages, this has been called multiple things, but the one that most people are famous with is the term propaganda. And Lord knows the Imperium loves its propaganda. The best example we have of this is the Imperial Infantryman's Uplifting Primer. This is a book issued to every single Guardsman who has ever existed and ever will exist. Essentially, it is a guidebook to the many different foes that the Imperium will face. It tells you what to do in certain situations, fighting certain foes, what weapons to use, what tactics to use, and what to expect. And it's that last one that we're really going to hyper-focus on. Because, ladies and gentlemen, it's canonical that the Imperial Guard believe that the Imperial Infantryman's Uplifting Primer is best used as toilet paper, because it is 100,000% pure and utter propaganda. There is not a lick of valuable information from that bloody thing. It is completely and utterly pointless. A fun fact for you all, we actually have an official written version of the Imperial Infantryman's Uplifting Primer. Yes, GW didn't need to actually make one of these. It's pretty sick, not gonna lie. But this is what it has to say about orcs. Orcs are cowards. A tactic they often employ is to send forward waves of their smaller brethren, Gretchens, ahead of the main advance to soak up fire. Make prodigious use of flamer weapons, as the bright light and heat terrifies these orc runts, adding confusion to their ranks. An orc can seem as an alarming prospect when first encountered. They stand taller than a man, with hunched broad shoulders and long arms. They may seem heavily muscled, but the fact is their muscle tissue is not as dense as a human's. In actuality, they are considerably weaker than the average man, despite what their appearance suggests. Their skin is thick and coarse, ranging in hues from green to almost black. Portions of their body are covered in stiff, black hair. Their brow is heavy, denoting their lack of intellect, and their little, almost useless eyes have a red cast to them. They have great tusks, which jut from their mouths, but they are not sharp, and a firm tug will pull them out by the root. When confronting orcs in combat, remember their weaknesses and consider the facts. They are but animals, and they have no place in our galaxy, where they prey on the weak and helpless. After they've seen you with a loaded lasgun and a smile on your face, you can shoot them in the back as they run away. So as an Imperial Infantryman, from this you know that orcs are Xenos, they're actually weaker than you should engage them in melee, and they will turn away and run because they are cowards when they see you. And here, we need to talk about the in-universe versus the out-of-universe real quick. Many times in Warhammer 40k, when we read lore as the community, we often facepalm, because we think, my god, how stupid are you? How do you not know this? But there is something we often forget. We're essentially the smartest people in 40k, because we know everything about every faction, about everyone, or rather, we can gain access to it. While your standard infantryman, created from a hive city, all he knows is what has been told. And what he has been told is that orcs are weak cowards who will run away when they see you. That's all that he knows. If you came into 140k and you didn't know left from right when it comes to this setting, and this is what you read, then you too would believe that this is actual fact. And, ladies and gentlemen, this is indeed the Guard's greatest weakness, and why many times the Guard is so bloody ineffective. It's not that they're weak, it's not that they're trained poorly, it's not that they have rubbish equipment. Yes, there can indeed be a case in some regiments, but for the average Imperial Guard regiment, they're just given bad information. Anyone who's served before will tell you, getting bad information before an operation is a hell of a thing, and often can lead to absolute disaster. Because, ladies and gentlemen, the only time you're going to find out that the information is wrong is when you try and melee an orc, and you realize his muscle is in fact not less dense than yours. It is in fact several times stronger than yours, and he has a bloody lot more of it. And for those of you who are wondering, is knowing your enemy really that important? We have a perfect example, taken from the Only War RPG book, where we can see that a new regiment is being trained, and they're not being trained easy. We started weapons training today, and I got to fire a lasgun for the first time. They took us down to the depths of the ship, where the sound of engines got louder and the air smelt bad. It looked like a chamber had been used for training before, as it had burn marks on the wall and what looked like old dry blood on the decking. Our sergeant, Praetor, was there too. I think I remember him from the enforcer station of our strata, though if he was from there, he didn't seem to remember me or the others. There was a lot of yelling and noise, and it seemed like we couldn't do anything right. When Drayon dropped his charge pack while trying to reload, Praetor gave him a hard smack on the back of the head, and told him that an orc wouldn't wait for him to pick it up, whatever an orc is. Either way, it seems pretty important that we can call fire quickly and in time with each other. Lasguns don't seem to have much kick, which is good, so it's pretty easy to keep firing one shot after the other and be roughly on target. I did alright, but Praetor seems to think we can all do better, and says he has some more motivating training methods in mind, whatever that means. Later, this poor guardsman will find out just exactly what this motivating training is, and it's a bit extreme to say the least. I still can't believe what just happened. Praetor called it training exercise, but I'd never been so scared in my whole life. Not even that time I got lost in the strata vacuum tunnels after lockdown. It had been at least a dozen or more cycles since we started weapon training, and most of us seemed to be getting pretty good at hitting targets. They even started to group us into squads depending on our abilities. I ended up in one of the better ones, designated B14, since we were part of Company B, so they say. Today though, Praetor told us that we would have to learn how to fire under pressure if we were to make real soldiers, and shooting at a target that doesn't shoot back can only teach you so much. So we were taken in teams down into another part of the hold, where they locked us in a series of tunnels. At first I didn't know what they were doing, and assumed we might have to find our way out or survive until they released us. It was only when the first servitor turned up and started shooting at us that it became clear what was going on. The servitors had been fitted with heavy armor plates and low-impact slug throwers, so as to keep casualties to a minimum, they told us later. At the time though, we had to fight for our lives, and I got hit more than once while we shot our way out. Afterwards, I heard a couple of guys from D Company had been killed when they let the servitors get too close and were shot at point-blank range. From these two excerpts, we can tell the training here is not easy, and it's relatively similar to our modern combat training. Again, this is meant to depict an average guard regiment, and I believe that's fair to say they are competently trained, just as, if not most likely better than those we have in the modern day military. But the point of this is as such. These are not penal battalions, these are not hive gangers. These are trained soldiers who have received at least several weeks worth of training, which again is roughly equivalent to what we have in the modern day, at least for basic training. And again, this training makes sense against humans, because that's another thing about the Guard. The Guard has a 90% mortality rate against things that are not human. When we think about that, we think about Eldar, we think about Chaos Space Marines, we think about Orcs. The Guard is not trained to fight them, nor is the Guard prepared to fight them, nor does the Guard have any information to fight them. But against a normal mortal human, the Guard is pretty effective. And again, most often times what the Guard is fighting is usually going to be some type of rebellion or Chaos Cult uprising. Yes, there are plenty of invasions by Chaos warbands, Tyranid hive fleets, Necron dynasties, and everything in between, because the Imperium is massive, and there is a lot more Chaos cultists and insurrections than there are Chaos Space Marines. So on average, your average guardsman is going to be fighting one of those first, and probably, maybe even only them. Well, ladies and gentlemen, to drive this point home, let's find out exactly what happens when the Imperial Guard fights an enemy they know nothing about. Taken from Only War. They came last night, when the night sky turned dark and most of us were sleeping. The first I knew anything was wrong was when one of our perimeter flares was tripped somewhere in the dark. The next thing I knew, something landed in the trench beside me. It looked like a stick, with a metal ball on one end. Then everything turned white for a second, and I was thrown to the ground. Only as I was getting back up did I realize Torch had stepped between me and the bomb, and taken the brunt of the blast, shredding his flesh and breaking his bones. Shoving up to the trench's firing step, I could see a dozen hulking figures running out of the earthworks towards me. It was then I remembered Praetor and the servitors, and started firing. Scores more guardsmen took up position beside me, just as we'd been taught. We laid down volley after volley at the advancing figures, yet still they came. As they got closer, I realized each one of them must have stood 7 foot tall, covered in muscle and howling for blood through wickedly pointed teeth. Just feet from where I stood, I saw one of the creatures reach down into our trench and haul out a poor guardsman, before ripping his arm from his socket and tossing him aside like a toy. It was then that our lines seemed to waver, and thoughts of flight were swimming through my mind. Our captain, Pavan, who had joined us in the trench, didn't seem to know what to do, and I saw him crawl back towards the center of Rand's bluff with fear in his eyes. All around, men were falling back, following their captain. Then, I heard a shot ring out, distinct, deep, and loud. Standing over Pavan's body was Commissar Kurtz, a man I had only seen from afar and heard dire rumors about. I still remember what he said. "Fight them! Or fight me! Make your choice! But remember, the God Emperor is watching you, and you will be judged!" And so, I forgot them, and fought until there was no more fighting to be done. It's been months since I came to this cursed world to do my duty to the God Emperor. I'm all that's left out of the fabricated guild lads, and the lost from my strata as far as I know. There is no peace here, and no point to what we do. I have fought the orcs time and again, and seen what they're capable of. I have fought the rebels here, traitors which I spit on every time as I put a louse round between their cowardly shoulder blades. There is no point in recording what I do, for there is no reason to it, and no respite. But I am a guardsman, This is my duty and my honor, and I will serve my emperor and bring glory to my regiment, as long as a single breath fills my body. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what I believe is the perfect way to describe the god. Outnumbered, outgunned, lied directly to their face, having everything stacked against them, but still choosing to stand and fight. For the god may be many things, but they are certainly brave men and women, each and every single one of them. So now we know why most guard regiments tend to meet a very bad end on the first deployment, because they're lied to. Now, some of you may be questioning, Brad, is it really that important to have good information? Will them having that information make all the difference? And the truth is, yes. Yes, it will. If you have information, you can prepare. And when you're prepared, you can handle anything. And ladies and gentlemen, when the guard is prepared, they are very, very competent fighters. And there is no more perfect example than the Siege of Cadia. Now you may be a little confused, because it wasn't just God defending them, and I hear what you're saying. But whilst there were indeed many other defenders from all over the Imperium, the vast majority of them were just God. For example, the Cadians alone deployed over 600 proper regiments. That's excluding Kassakan and the Cadian White Shields. Mind you, each regiment is roughly a few thousand men. If we average it at roughly 4,000 to 5,000 men per regiment, that is millions of Cadians alone. Now let's compare that to the other fighters. There's roughly 20,000 to 30,000 Space Marines present, and roughly the same or slightly less than in Sisters of Battle. 4 Titan Legions and about 5 houses worth of Knights. If you combine all those together, those defenders average roughly 100,000, maybe 150,000. Compare that to millions of Cadians alone. And we consider all the extra guard that's there, the Cadian White Shields and the Kassakan, it's very much so that the rest of the guard doubled the number of Cadians present. So again, at the very lowest estimation, we have millions of Imperial Guard compared to basically 100,000 others. Many times over 10. So whilst fair to say the Imperial Guard were not alone on Cadia, the Siege of Cadia was very much a guardsman's fight. And my god, what fighting did they do? Taken from the fall of Cadia. Holy terror! Sergeant Verska swore. What was that? Glaive saw it too, big and crimson, a blur that rushed past the loophole hatch, too fast and close for him to get a proper look. I don't know, but it's big. Heavies will deal with it. As for us, he could hear the madman's howls and chainsaws of the approaching berserker pack, and unshrouded his melter gun, sticking the barrel through the step-back loop that rang the length of the bunker hab. He didn't have to wait long. Glaive had barely finished muttering the benediction to peace, an invocation of violence, when a rush of beetle black armor filled the street below. Let them get in further. Steady, steady. The spirit moved him. Glaive pulled the trigger, and 2 Chaos Space Marines melted. Damn your eyes, Glaive! Veshjar poured fire from his hellgun down into the mass. Amber runes on the Glaive's melter gun blinked, requesting he wait until gas buildup allowed for another shot. While waiting, he triggered a frag grenade and pushed it out the slit. By the time it exploded with a dull thwump and a rattle of shrapnel and ceramite, his melter gun was already at the loophole. Another berserker fell, legs incinerated and hip joints fused. Still, it clawed across the ground towards the bunker, even as its companions ran it over. They're on the stairs! Stricter Christian warned. He was watching their backs with a hell pistol. Below, one of the trip mines he'd rigged discharged with a cough of directional pellets and a harsh screech of shrapnel and armored plate. They were on the 2nd floor already. Fast. So fast. Glaive spun up, advancing towards the door with the melter gun already angled to sweep the stairs. On the indicator, amber block runes counted their way towards a full charge. 1 amber. 2. 3. He saw an empty landing below. Nearly full The stairwell broke inward as a transhuman madman rammed through the wall rather than turning the corner. It put the heretic nearly at the top of the flight, close enough that he swung his chain axe at Stricter Christen and buried it into the rock-creaked doorway as the Medicaid flinched backwards. Red smoke jutted from a helm grill bristling with ivory teeth. Blood! It howled. Green rune. The melter beam liquefied the traitor space marine from eyelids to hips. Its massive disconnected parts, the legs still pumping in a run, rolling down the stairs and leaving the chain axe buried in the doorway. They're climbing the building! Screams from the firing slit. Sergeant Vesker's howling as a spiked gauntlet punched through the narrow window to grab him and force a bolt pistol in his chest. It discharged, and the scream stopped. Glaive swiveled with his melter gun, but the assailant at the vision slit was already gone, letting the sergeant's corpse drop on the floor. "Stairs again!" shouted Christian. Glaive spun back. The legless berserker he had seen below was trying to scramble up the stairs towards them, shouting blasphemies. Glaive vaporized it, leaving another pool of liquid armored slag hardening on the stairs. 3 floors. What? No legs. It had no legs, but it crawled up 3 floors trying to kill us. Glaive thought about that, then swept the beam of his melter gun along the rockcrete stairs, eating away at the grey stone and metal supports beneath. Well, the next one will have to jump for us. Granted, I know these are Kazakin, and most likely the best of the best that the Imperium has to offer when it comes to guard regiments. But still, a Chaos Space Marine is so much and above even a Kazakin, it's not even funny. And here we see the power of knowing your enemy and being able to prepare. The guard in a defensive position, armed with explosives, special weapons, can easily turn an assault from corn berserkers. Never underestimate knowing your enemy and being able to make a plan. But for those of you who are still upset at the Kazakin, it wasn't just them on Cadia. The regular Cadians too proved why they're some of the best in the galaxy, and why the Imperial Guard should not be trifled with. Taken from Fall of Cadia. As Scourge master of the Black Fleet and leader of the Hounds, he'd always known that in a stand-up fight, he would lose 1 berserker for every 50 guardsmen slain. 100 if the thing was done right. But these Cadians, they were themselves warriors of the blood. He'd never seen their like outside the hated, unenlightened chapters of the Adeptus Astartes. As his demon sight flew, he saw a wounded Kazakin discharging a Helgon point blank into a berserker's lower abdomen, his bayonet broken on the power armor. The sergeant with a power sword countercharged against a whole file of Laskar's pack, taking one down with his plasma pistol, before a chain axe split him from shoulder to hip. Several streets over, a line of bunker habs 4 blocks long lifted up into the air in a curtain of flame, tearing apart 40 warriors from Perngansa's contingent. The mortals had contested the buildings until the Korniks stormed it, then triggered pre-rigged explosives. The Cadians had baited his warriors inside, and sacrificed their own lives to annihilate them. "Count our dead to theirs," he said to Artessa, and she flashed off his shoulders and circled. "How steep is the butcher's bill?"
1 hound dead for every mortal 30, master. 1 hound for every 30 mortal dead, master. They're standing unto death, bringing your warriors into them with the blood sleep.
And they say the Adeptus Astartes know no fear. Even the Corpse Emperor's sons do not throw away their lives with such wantonness. 1 hound for every 30. It is unthinkable. Perverse. Again, that is 30 Kazakin and regular Cadians combined for every 1 hound. And like I said, millions of guard, tens of thousands of Space Marine. That is not good math. The Imperial Guard, when done right, good training, good weapons, and most importantly, good information, can stop any and every foe. Because Abaddon the Despoiler did not conquer Cadia, he destroyed it. The Kazakhs of mighty Cadia stood in loyalist hands. It was not the blades of the War Master's dogs that claimed that mighty world, but rather it was destroyed out of hatred and spite. Not to take anything away from Abaddon's victory, but he tried to pry it from the cold dead hands of the Kazakin, and even in death, their duty did not end. And that truly represents what the Guard is. The Guard is the perfect defensive force. If the Guard knows what enemy they're fighting, if the Guard knows what they're capable of, if the Guard has time to dig in, they can create a defensive fortress that will withstand any foe. Time and time again, the Imperial Guard have shown that they can hold, and they can hold well. It's common knowledge in warfighting doctrine that it is far easier to defend a position than it is to attack it. With the axiom being you need 3 times as much offensive troops as defensive troops, and the offensive troops usually need to be better trained. Perfect example we have comes from the book Gunheads. When Colonel Schramm and his fighting 98th are the first ones to assault and secure the landing zone on the world of Golgotha. Yet while they secure the landing zone, it does not appear that they will hold on to them, for the orcs are coming, and they want a good fight. The men close enough to hear his voice turn to see their colonel standing there, the banner snapping and fluttering as he waved it over his head. He looked like an image from a propaganda poster, and their spirits burned with fresh pride. Storm could see it as he looked into their eyes. He saw the fires of determination surging there, and the will to die fighting. "Honor and glory!" shouted a sergeant off to the right. "Honor and glory!" bellowed his squad. Something changed in the air, building up like a massive electrical charge. Even the wounded seemed suddenly whole again, though their bodies still bled. They turned from the sight of their colonel and his banner, raised Lasgon stocks to armored shoulders, and met the orcs with renewed ferocity, determined to dispatch as many of the slavering beasts as possible before they were overcome for good. "Push through your pain," Strom willed them. "Just a bit further. A bit longer so we know the Emperor's eyes are on us." Only a few hundred meters now until the orcs were in among them. Mere moments into the fighting became hand to hand. At that range, the greenskins' massive physiologies would allow them to rip through the Cadians like wet paper. Only the mighty Kazakin stormtroopers, of which Strom had started with a single company, and now had less than 3 full platoons, had any chance in close quarters, and even then, not much of one. "Fix the bayonets!" ordered Strom. Kessel repeated the order over the Vox. He might as well have said, "Get ready to die," against the orcs. It was essentially the same thing. The call was taken up by officers and sergeants all along the line, as the gap shrank to 40 meters, then 30. Last fire blazed out in a last desperate bid to make a difference before the clash of blade on blade. Plenty of orcs went down, struck in the face with lethal short-range bursts. But if this bought the Cadians any time at all, it was mere seconds. The orc artillery was rolling forward too, unable to fire on the Cadians now that their own infantry had closed the gap. The greenskin gunnery crews, in the manner of their race, were desperate to get closer to the center of the murder, to stain their hands with the blood of dying men. For this, they kept their machines rolling in. 20 meters from Strom, a massive orc with a broken tusk hacked one trooper to the ground with its cleaver, shoved roughly past another, and raced directly forwards. It was coming straight for the colonel, attracted by the bright snapping banner above his head. As it closed, it raised its massive stubber with a single hand and fired a burst that caught the colonel on the right shoulder. His Tarf armor plus body armor was enough to deflect the shot, but the impact threw him from his feet. He landed on the red sand with a grunt. The force of the bullet's impact had broken his arm, and the banner fell from his hand. Lieutenant Castle moved in a blur, catching the banner as it fell, hoisting it high, desperate not to dishonor the regiment by allowing its sanctified cloth to touch the ground. He stabbed the base of the haft into the sand, braced it with one hand, and crouched by his colonel, yelling his name. "Are you alive, sir? Speak to me, Colonel?" Groaning in agony and clutching his shattered arm, Strom rolled up with Castle's eager aid. Struggled to his feet. He looked around to see men forming a defensive line around him, fighting back to back, desperately with bayonets, pistols, sharpening and trenching tools, anything they had at hand, against the massive chipped axes and cleavers of the orcs. "For Cadia!" Strom roared, leaving Kessel with the banner and drawing his hell pistol again, this time with his left hand. "For Cadia!" His men roared back. They fought with everything they had, but the air suddenly filled once again with a deafening boom of big guns. Strom tensed, guessing the orc artillery crews had decided to fire after all, whether they killed their falcon or not. He girded himself with the explosive blast that would bring an end to his life. Any second now. Any second. But it never came. There was no ear-splitting whistle overhead. "Armor!" cried one of his platoon leaders of the Voxnet, "in Terra's holy name!" "They're fielding tanks too?" asked another. "No, not the blasted orcs, man. Imperial tanks. Lehman Russ battle tanks inbound from the west." Strom heard a second stutter of booming fire, and this time, to his utter astonishment, a mob of orcs pressing in on the left flank vanished. consumed by a great fountain of dirt and flame.
Their artillery!
Voxed another platoon leader.
The orc SPGs are burning! All of them junked!
Another sharp stutter sounded from the west, announcing death for more of the foe. The horde was being blasted apart, knots of them dispersing in fountains of dust, raining back to the earth as burnt and bloody pieces. Those that weren't killed outright by the high explosive shells were horribly maimed by flying shrapnel. They went down screaming and roaring as tank fire continued to scythe into their ranks. Even those orcs engaged in close quarters combat couldn't help themselves. The sounds of cannon fire reached them through their battle lust. For just a second, they turned their heads towards the source, and Strom's fighters pressed their momentary advantage, downing scores of them, forming a gap across which they could once more employ their las rifles and surviving heavy weapons. The Kaskin platoons took this opportunity to press in from the right, shifting closer to Colonel Strom, the better to protect him and react faster to his needs. Through the space that had opened, Strom could see the cause of his company's unexpected respite. There, on the western flank, a great dust cloud rose, churning up from the desert floor. At its head, 10 Cadian tanks charged forward in an armored assault wedge. Behind them, barely visible in the dusty wake, came a line of Hercules half-tracks filled to the brim with men and supply crates. It looked like an entire armored company. For a moment, Strom thought he was dreaming.
"Colonel!"
yelled Kessel excitedly.
"There's an urgent message coming through from..." "Say again?" "Roger that. From Lieutenant Von Droy, sir."
"Von Droy," said Strom. He didn't recognize the name. Most of Exelon's armor was with the 10th Division. He and his men were with the 8th.
"Well, don't keep it to yourself, Hans. What's the message?"
Kessel beamed.
"To dig in, sir. Von Droy says the gunheads are here."
And that, ladies and gents, is why it's so very important for the Guard to hold. But whilst I've gone on and on so far in this video, touting the ability of the Guard, their weapons, their training, there are two things that make the Guard a truly devastating foe. The first is their numbers. The average hive world has anywhere from tens of billions to trillions of souls, and many a number of those will become guardsmen. There truly is more guardsmen than we could ever imagine, and there will always be more guardsmen. For it doesn't matter how outgunned the Imperial Guard are, it doesn't matter how outnumbered they are, it doesn't matter how better the enemy is, it doesn't matter how more advanced they are, there will always be more Guard to grab the rifle and take up the defensive position of those who have fallen. 10 times 10 may fall, hundreds may be slain and scores upon thousands. It does not matter, for there will be millions standing to replace them, all in the name of the service of the Holy God Emperor, in his glory and honor. And that leads me on to my second reason. The Guard is brave. The Guard is courageous. The Guard is normal men and women who decide to spit in the face of the evils of the grim darkness of the far future, and they decide that they will fight regardless, if of nothing at all, just to smite the enemies of mankind. The Guard know what they are. The Guard know that they are dead, but the Guard will still do it for the glory and honor of those around you. Because sometimes you can't win, but sometimes you don't need to win. No. Sometimes you just need to make that orc turn and run. Sometimes you need to make that Aldari stop and stare. Sometimes you just need to make that Chaos Space Marine cock his head in confusion. Sometimes you just need to break that Necron's logic circuit. And sometimes you just need to put the fear of the God Emperor into that blue-faced Tau bastard. For now he knows the true might of the hammer of the Emperor. And ladies and gentlemen, all this comes from one very important aspect. One characteristic, one thing that many guardsmen lack, and the one thing that every single old bastard of the Guard has. That being experience. Experience is the key. Some of the greatest regiments, Cadian, Katachan, Krieg, are some of the most experienced regiments. They're some of the oldest, some of the longest lived and the longest served. They have veterans who have seen things time and time again. Because the number one thing that makes the Imperial Guard fall is the fact that it lacks understanding in its enemy. It lacks experience. in fighting the foe. When you give the Imperial Guard experience, in combination with their ability to defend, their sheer overwhelming numbers, and their goddamn spiteful spirit, you get a foe that makes even demons turn in horror. And experience is something that every single old bastard of the Guard has in droves. That's why some of the Guard's greatest characters are old veterans, because they have everything they need to become deadly. And whilst I could just end this video here, that seems a little half-baked. So I'm going to give you 3 examples of old veterans of the Guard, showing you just exactly why an old Guardsman is one of the most scariest things in all of Warhammer 40k. The first of these old bastards we're going to be talking about is none other than the Old Man of Armageddon, Commissar Sebastian Yarrick. Whilst many people know of Yarrick's exploits during the battles of Armageddon, what a lot of people don't realize is that his story started much earlier than that. He grew up on the world of Taos III. His parents having died previously, he was raised by his grandfather, an old Imperial Guard sergeant known as Yarrick. And he would be raised by his grandfather and taught in the old ways of the Guard. That was until he was 7 years old, when orcs invaded his homeworld. The world would be scoured, his grandfather dying in the process. But he would spend 3 years alone on the world, surviving the forest and laying traps for the greenskins. Eventually, however, Taos would be reclaimed by the Imperium, and they would find a young Sebastian, now taking up the name Yarrick in honor of his dead grandfather. So already before anything else, he has spent 3 separate years at the age of 10 fighting greenskins. From there he would be inducted into the Schola Progenium and eventually qualify as a Militarum Tempestus. From there he would serve, surviving many engagements for many years, before eventually he would transition into a Commissar. From there he would be assigned to Armageddon, where he would serve in over a dozen campaigns as Commissar to the Planetary Defense Forces. So already, before we even get to what made him famous, this man has survived decades of fighting against the Imperial's foes, most of them orcs. But as everyone knows, what would make him the Old Man of Armageddon would be his defense of Hive Hades during the Second War of Armageddon, which is known to the Imperium as the First. Here Yarrick would dig his feet in, commanding the Planetary Defense Forces and the Steel Legionnaires there, in opposition to the then wayward and despotic and absolutely incompetent planetary governor. And he would stymie the Orc invasion to such a point that Ghazghul would deploy his own chief lieutenant, a war boss known as Ulkhard, to find this Umi and kill him outright. And during this time, the war boss would lead a breach into the walls. Commissar Sebastian Yarrick, chainsword and bolt pistol in hand, would charge the Orc foe. From there a duel would engage, in which duel Sebastian Yarrick would lose his arm, and many thought that then and there, Hive Hades would fall. But no, using the remaining strength he had, Yarrick would then kill the Orc war boss, severing his head before severing his arm. From there he would lead a massive counterattack, driving off the assault. It was only then that it said he allowed him the luxury of passing out. And this was the beginning of the legend of Commissar Sebastian Yarrick. He would take the Orc's power claw for himself, attaching it to his own arm. He would also, after receiving an eye injury, have his eye replaced with a bionic, which shot lasers from it, knowing the superstitious Orc's belief in the so-called evil eye. Eventually, the Second War of Armageddon would be concluded, and Yarrick would take him to the Third, serving notably and dutifully. For he and all the Imperium, neither Inquisitor nor Magos, can be said to know the Orcs better than any mortal alive in the Imperium. In fact, some say that he may know them better than even the Adeptus Astartes, taken from the book Hell's Reach. The man speaking is ancient, and he looks every hour of his age. What keeps him on his feet is a mixture of minimal rejuven chem surgeries, crude bionics, and a faith in the Emperor found in the hatred for the enemies of man. I liked him the moment my visor's targeting reticules locked onto him. Both piety and hate echo in his every word. He should not hold rank here, not to the degree he does. He is merely a commissar in the Imperial Guard, and such a title does not tend to make generals, colonels, Astartes captains, and chapter masters remain in polite silence when it comes to tactical planning. Yet to the humans of this war council, and the citizens of Armageddon, he is the Old Man. a beloved hero of the Second War 57 years ago. Not just a hero, the hero. His name is Sebastian Yarrick. Even we Astartes must respect that name. And when he tells us all that Hive Hades will be destroyed within a matter of days, 100 Imperial commanders, human and Astartes alike, hang on his every word. I am one of them. This will be my first true command. Commissar Sebastian Yarrick leans over the edge of a hololithic display table with his remaining hand. The other arm is nothing but a stump. He keys in coordinates on the numeric data pad, and the hololith projection of Hive Hades widens with flickering impatience to display both of the planet's hemispheres in insignificant detail. The old man, a gaunt and wizened human of sharp features and skeletally obvious facial bones, gestures to the blip on the map that represents Hive Hades and its surrounding territories, wastelands in the main. 6 decades ago, the great enemy met his defeat at Hades. Our defense here was what won us the war. There are general murmurs of assent. The Commissar's voice carries around the expansive chamber through the floating skull drones equipped with Vox speakers, where their jaws had once been. I am surrounded by the familiar hum of active power armor, though the scents and faces that meet my eyes are new to me. Standing to my left at a respectful distance, his face raggedly proud around extensive bionics, is Chapter Master Seth of the Flesh Terrors, known to his men as the Guardian of the Rage. He smells of sacred weapon oils, his Primarch potent blood running beneath his weathered skin, and the spicy, unwholesome reptilian scent of the lizard predator kings that stalk the jungles of his home world. Seth is flanked by his own officers, all bareheaded with faces as pitted and cracked as their masters. Whatever wars have occupied the Flesh Terrors in recent decades, the conflicts have not been kind to them. To my left, my liege Helbrecht stands resplendent in his battle armor of black and bronze. Bayard, the Emperor's champion, is by his side. Both rest their helmets on the table's surface, the stern helms distorting the edge of the hololithic display, and give their full attention to the ancient Commissar. I cross my arms over my chest and do the same. Why? Someone asks. Their voice is low, too low to be human, and carries over the chamber without the need of Vox amplification. 100 heads turn to regard an Astartes in the bright red-orange of a lesser chapter. One unknown to me, he steps forward, leaning his knuckles on the table, facing Yarrick almost 20 meters distance.
We recognize Brother Captain Amaris,
An Imperial Herald announces from his position at Yarrick's side, smoothing the formal blue robes of his office. He bangs the butt of his staff on the ground 3 times.
Commander of the Angels of Fire.
Amaris nods in thanks, and fixes Yarrick with his unblinking gaze. Why would the green-skinned warlords simply annihilate the greatest battlefield of the last war? Surely our forces should muster at Hades, and stand ready to defend against the largest assault. Murmurs of agreement ripple throughout the gathered commanders. Emboldened, Amaris smiles at Yarrick. We are the Emperor's chosen mortal. We are his angels of death. We have centuries of battle experience compared to these human commanders at your side. No. Another voice replies. This one is distorted into a Vox-born snarl, filtered through a helmet's speakers. I swallow, as the herald bangs the staff another 3 times. I had not realized I'd spoken out loud.
We recognize Brother Chaplain Grimaldus,
he calls out.
Reclusiarch of the Black Templars.
Grimaldus shook his head at the gathered commanders. Over 100 human and Astartes, all standing around the huge table in his converted auditorium, once used for whatever dreary theatre performances occurred on a manufactory world. A riot of colors, heraldry, symbols of unity, varied uniforms, regimental designations, and iconography. General Kurov stood at the Commissar's shoulder, deferring to the old man in all things.
The Xenos do not think as we do. The green skin do not come to Armageddon for vengeance, or to seek to bleed us for the defeats they had suffered at Imperial hands in the past. They come for the pleasure of violence.
Yarrick, a skeleton wreathed in pale flesh and dark uniform, watched the night in silence. Amaris pounded his fist onto the table and pointed at the Templar. For a moment of deathly calm,
Grimaldus considered drawing his pistol and slaying him where he stood.
That leads credence to my belief,
Amaris almost snarled.
Not at all. Have you inspected what remains of Hive Hades? It is a ruin. There is nothing to fight over, nothing to defend. The great enemy knows this. He will be aware that Imperial forces will seek to put up no more than a token's resistance there, and fall back to defend hives that are still worth defending. It is likely the Warlord will obliterate Hive Hades from orbit, rather than to seek to take it.
We cannot let this hive fall. It is a symbol of mankind's defiance. With respect, Chaplain.
Enough. Peace, Brother Captain Amaris. Grimaldus speaks with wisdom.
Grimaldus inclined his head in thanks.
I will not be silenced by a mortal.
Amaris growled, but the fight was gone from him. Yarick, the thin, ancient commissar, just stared at the Astartes captain. After several moments, Amaris looked back to the hololithic topography around the hive. Yarick turned back to the gallant officers, his one human eye stern, his augmented one whirring in its socket, as it refocused on the faces before him.
Hades will not survive the first week,
he said again, this time shaking his head.
We must abandon the hive and spread the forces here to other bastions of strength. This is not the Second War. What's coming in system now far exceeds what has laid waste to the planet before. The other hives must be reinforced 1,000 times over.
It took a moment to clear his throat, and a cough stole over him, dry and hoarse. When it subsided, the old man smiled, without even a ghost of humor.
Hive Hades will burn. We must make our stand somewhere else.
Commissar Sebastian Yarick. A man so old he probably should be dead, but because of that, he has more knowledge than even some space marines about the greenskins. The most experienced human soldier on all of Armageddon, so much so that even space marines must respect his wisdom. That is an old man of the god. The next old bastard we have is none other than Colonel Ironhand Strachan, commander of the 2nd Catachan Jungle Fighters, known as the Green Vipers. Strachan began his journey like all and every Catachan Guardsmen do. He started as an ordinary private, and eventually would work his way all the way up to being colonel of the whole regiment. A soldier's soldier, someone who doesn't care for formalities and niceties, much like many of those from his regiments. But to say this man just doesn't give a damn is an understatement of the highest proportions. Colonel Strachan is a man that has a job to do, and he will get that job done, come hell or high water. He really doesn't care whether you're an Eldar, Tau, Orc, Tyrannid, or Space Marine. If you stand in the way of the Emperor, you are marked for death. And here are just some of his feats of lunacy. He was able to stop a whole formation of demon engines with only 22 men, 10 lasguns, and a case of mining charges. He would duel and defeat the Dark Eldar Archon known as Yekdrash, one-on-one. He would stall a Tyrannid push, which was led by a Hive Tyrant, tricking the Hive Tyrant into being exploded by demolition charges. When he went to go and inspect the Hive Tyrant, he was said to have remarked that he had killed bigger things on Catachan before the Hive Tyrant came back to life and bit him around the torso. He would survive the bite, drawing his long Catachan fang and decapitating it then and there. He would fight with the legendary boss Snickrot, one of the greatest commandos in all of history, and beat him in a duel. He would then 1v1 an Orc war boss, before stabbing him in the neck and goading a Squiggoth to crush the Green Brute. And his last and most famous example, he would fight a Muriel Landshark and eventually kill it with his famous knife, but not before it had devoured his entire left arm, as well as a good chunk of his pectoral chest. In each and every one of these examples, Colonel Ironhand Strachan has shown two things. 1, he simply just does not care. 2, he gets horribly, horribly wounded. So much so that his regiment has given him the nickname of the Man of Adamantium. Not only because most of his body is metal, but because it's said that there is a man with no more sterner outlook than Colonel Ironhand Strachan. Or as he puts it, and why the hell does he have to do everything around here? Having an experienced commander who knows what they're doing is the most important thing in any military formation. But some of you may be wondering, experience is indeed important, but what about if you face a foe that has just better technology than you? Is just better in training? is just a superior enemy. Will your experience in one aspect translate into combating them? And the truth is, yes, as we have the perfect example where Colonel Ironhand Strachan and his Catachan jungle fighters managed to ambush Shadow Sun. Yes, that Shadow Sun. And the infantry-based Catachan managed to actually force them to retreat. Taken from Blood Oath.
"All casts, crouch and shield your south,"
she transmitted as wildly as possible. "The Guela attack!" As one, the fire warriors in the jungle row dropped to one knee and raised the large oblong plates of their shoulder armor to face the hard-packed road leading back the way they had come. A heartbeat later, the petty earth was torn upwards in ear-blasting strings of explosions that echoed across the jungle eaves. Dozens of Shadow Sun's rearguard were flung high into the air. Their rims slipped from their bodies. Here and there, their pulse rifles discharged random sprays of plasma as disembodied fingers clutched tight. Hundreds of pale Guela brutes roared out of the jungle in crude but effective camouflage, many of their number crying out praise to the Imperium's dead god. As the tower reeled in surprise, more and more of the Guela emerged from the mist to either side of the road, their rifles spitting laser blasts at fire warriors and battlesuits alike. Some of them charged headlong into fire warriors hunkered down at the side of the road, drawing knives the length of a Tao's arm and plunging them into the weak points of their armor. 1 in every 10 of the Guela emerging from the trees carried a cylindrical tank of volatile fluid that the Imperials loved to employ so much. Cackling with alien glee, the Guela troopers sent whooshing clouds of flame into the ranks of the Tau, firing back at them. Whole crowds of noble fire warriors were caught in deadly clouds and transformed into burning, flailing puppets. One Imperial soldier caught a pulse rifle volley in the chest, its bolt slamming right into his torso and igniting the tanks on his back with a loud thwoomph.
"Riptides, target the tree lines. Heavy burst cannon only. Rearguard, move in to engage at close quarters. For the greater good, engage!"
The XV-104 battlesuits at the heart of the fire warrior phalanx stood inviolate in the chaos, each pivoting their waist gimbals to level their arm cannons at different sections of the tree line. The reactors that powered the battlesuits pulsed blue light into the mist as their rate of fire grew steadily higher. With a loud bang, something overloaded inside the Riptide close to Shadowstorm. A thin shriek coming from the battlesuit's shuddering torso as it vented a geyser of steam. It was all the chance the Guela needed. They swarmed up the giant's legs like arboreal simians, knives stabbing into the gaps between armored plates as their wiry fingers wedged into the cracks. Shadow Sun's scythe passed to cut 2 of them from the Riptide's back with precision bursts of fusion fire. Curving upright once more, Shadow Sun glimpsed the scar-ravaged Guela, with a glowering bionic eye climb up high onto the malfunctioning Riptide. He plunged a metallic arm deep into the battlesuit's neck joint, rooting around before yanking half a bloody Tau head from the aperture he had torn in its metal hide. Shadow Sun's stomach turned. She pivoted in mid-air, in preparation to loose a blast right at the scarred Guela, but the obscuring fog closed in around her once more, hiding him from sight. Mighty, towering warsuits, with advanced technology far above that of mankind, led by one of the greatest commanders that race possesses, were outmaneuvered, outdone, and surprised by some brutes of men covered in muddy camouflage wielding bloody big knives, but most importantly, led by one hardy old bastard. Colonel Ironhand Strachan is the definition of what doesn't kill me isn't trying hard enough. A man that survived everything time and time again, has garnered more than enough experience to deal with the greatest commander that the Tau have ever put forward. That is what an old bastard of the god can do. Our final example is, in my opinion, the greatest, and the most poignant point as to what I mean. Our last example comes from the episode of Hammer and Bolter, known as Return to Cadia, and it focuses around one particular individual, that being Guardsman Troll. Some background context before I can explain. In this episode, a group of Cadians travel back to a shrine of their dead homeworld to pay homage. However, as they get there, they realize something is very wrong, for it turns out all the pilgrims have been slaughtered, including every single guardsman there. It turns out that a word-bearer-possessed space marine had survived the destruction of Cadia, and he was now looking for a way to get back to his warband. Slowly, he manages to track down and kill each and every one of the Cadian squad, until he is left face to face with Troll. From there, he thinks that he's simply going to be able to kill this Cadian, take his shuttle and travel off-world. It is then that Troll simply ignites a grenade before throwing it into the ammunition storage, taking him, the Possessed, and the ship all in one massive explosion. Now, why is this important? To explain that, there are two things I want to point out. The first is that we see there is a younger Cadian with them, an inexperienced recruit, and he is most affected by the Possessed and his machinations. More specifically, however, the Possessed calls him a Voidborn, meaning that he was not born on Cadia. Thus, he did not receive the training of the Cadians. And this is important, because the sheer fear and possibly warp trickery that the Possessed is able to manifest drives this Cadian mad, so much so that he attacks his own friends and is forced to be put down by the fellow guardsmen. Troll, however, when he comes face to face with this Possessed, we get a beautiful scene, and I doubt if I'll be able to play it for you word for word, but all we see is Troll staring at the Chaos Space Marine Possessed, and he is screaming in fear. There is fear in his eyes, for he knows that when he dies here, his soul will go to the Chaos Guards to be used as their plaything. But Troll, looking at Troll's eyes, there is nothing like fear there. There is cold defiance. There is the pride of Cadia manifest. Those are the eyes of an old man who have survived years, decades of grueling war. He was on Cadia. He survived the death of Cadia. He survived fighting long after. Before that, decades of service honorable. His scarred features tell a tale of mighty valor and great deeds. And right here now, when faced with the literal personification of a demon in human form, it is the demon who feels fear, not him. For there is merely defiance in his eyes. Because he's been here. He's done that. He knows what awaits for him. He knows what Possessed is. But more importantly, he knows where he's going after this. And there is no fear for where he will sit. It's almost like this episode was made to show my point. We get two Cadians. One barely experienced and lesser trained, falling to the machinations of something he didn't even know could exist, versus one who had long known about the enemy, who had fought and killed the enemy, and who stared directly into the eyes of a demon and didn't even flinch. And this is perfect because many people will point to the other two characters and say, oh, they're named characters. They have plot armor. They're supposed to be that good. They're not normal guardsmen. Well, here we have a guardsman who did something so incredibly superhuman, one might say. Something that defied all expectations of the Imperial Guard. And he is just a normal old veteran. He is an old man who's seen hell, who's fought hell, and is no longer scared of it. That is a true old man of the Guard. And that is what the Guard is truly capable of. Because, ladies and gentlemen, there is one maxim that has been true since time immemorial. Experience is king. And when you give the Imperial Guard decades of experience, then in the end, even demons fear them. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you also very much for watching this video. Let me know, what do you guys think down below? Is this something that you guys noticed? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? What do you think about the video? How do you think about my points? And do you think I articulated correctly? Love to hear your thoughts down below. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to say a massive thank you guys for watching. But even more massive thank you to my awesome members and Patreons. Shout out to brand new member Ken_Sakura333 who joined at our private tier. Thank you, my brother. I love you. I appreciate you. You are awesome. And welcome to the core. Shout out to my Lieutenant tier members, Mr. Eddie V3, Mr. Draw of the Void, and Mr. Curtis Studies. Shout out to my Sergeant tier members, Mr. Damiak, Mr. Warsmith.Fireheart, Mr. Andy McGee, Mr. Matthew Merrill, Mr. Sean IRL7, and Mr. Bullwin. Shout out to my Corporal tier members, Mr. Tremaine the Math Kitty, Mr. Lord Rosarius, Mr. Tech Priest Toaster, Miss Shauna Smithers, Mr. Gentle Salamander, and the Wench of Warhammer. And finally, certainly but not least, shout out to my awesome private tier members, Mr. Thomas Wells Lawns, Mr. Iva_SBW, Mr. Monkey Man, Mr. Michael Aida, Mr. Diego Castro, Mr. Fortress Udom,
Mr. CM Dine, Mr. Eric Massaro, and Mr. Dom Marek.
Thank you. I love you. I appreciate you guys. Sign up today with memberships. You get a bunch of awesome benefits, behind the scenes stuff, early access to videos, member only content, but most importantly, you get to help out your boy. But remember, this will always be free. So whether you give your boy a dollar or not, I will love you just the same. Mwah! But ladies and gentlemen, I've been the General Bradley 101. You've been beautiful, awesome, and amazing people. Thank you all so very much for watching. Y'all make sure to stay loyal there, boys and gals. And I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss, Rangers.